I'm just going to say good morning to everybody. My name is Heidi Sidley. I'm the principal and managing director at Stone Street Equity. I'm blessed to work very closely with a lot of not-for-profits as a trusted retirement plan consultant and investment advisor and a fiduciary. And I'm also a proud member of Mission Control. On behalf of all of us at Mission Control, welcome to today's Mission Control Masterclass. Mission Control is a nonprofit think tank. It's comprised of business professionals. Many are on the call today. And we're dedicated to the success of the nonprofit community and their missions. Our members consult and provide valuable services to help nonprofits operate more effectively and efficiently. Thanks for joining us today. Today's webinar is on keeping your financial house in order. We host these master classes and other events to stimulate and engage nonprofit execs who are dedicated to positive impact. The masterclass is going to be recorded, and you can access it on our website later, or we'll send a link around to everybody after the webinar. Today, you're going to hear multiple perspectives and recommendations from an auditor, a banker, a consultant, and an executive director on keeping your house in financial order. Our featured guest today is Renee Flagler. She's the executive director at Girls Inc. of Long Island, and she's going to tell us how she led her team during these turbulent times while continuing to deliver life-changing programs and experiences for young girls, and most importantly, reaching record numbers served. But before we begin, I want to take a moment. Josh is going to help us out now on technology to pull up a poll. We're very excited about our next event. It's called Leadership Exchange, and it's going to be a social and highly interactive peer-to-peer event where you're going to be able to have the opportunity to collaborate with other executives in the nonprofit space. But we want to take a poll about what time you would like this, because it has a social aspect to it, right? So if it's in the morning, then you're going to be drinking coffee. If it's in the afternoon, you're going to be drinking maybe a little stronger beverage. So when do you like to network? And meet and peer-to-peer exchange and dig in with other executives in the not-for-profit space. Really appreciate you taking this poll. Helps us to coordinate and better meet our audience's needs. And I want you also to mark your calendar while we're getting that poll underway. Mark your calendars for that event. That event's going to happen on Tuesday, April 20th, either in the morning or the evening, depending on your responses here. Now I want to move on to today's program. Our Mission Control panelists here are Hope Goldstein, Jennifer Smith, and Raj Thakar. They're going to introduce themselves, and you'll see the panelist questions. I'm going to post them in the chat box. We have a few questions that we're going to be posing to our panelists, and this way you can easily follow along. If you have questions, please post them. You can put Q1, Q2 next to your questions so we can keep them in order. I'm going to try and stop and pause after each topic so that we can address topic-related questions. And then there's going to be an open Q&A at the end of the masterclass, so we can answer any questions there also. And any that remain, we're going to reach out directly to you if we can't get to everybody's question. So thanks again for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to Hope.
Terrific. And Heidi, thank you. I want to begin first wishing everybody a happy new year. I think I'm allowed to do that even though it's January 13th. And, if I was taught, if you haven't seen people or met anyone since January 1st, you at least have the month of January to wish everybody a happy new year. So, and thank you for joining us. This is going to be a lot of fun. It should be interactive. So to Heidi's point, although we have Q&A at the end, if there's questions relative to the topics that we're talking about throughout this panel, please put it in your chat, and Heidi's monitoring that to help us get the questions out. So Hope Goldstein, I'm a co-partner. I have another partner, Mike McNee, which some of you may know, at Marks Paneth, and we oversee the nonprofit government and healthcare group. And we probably serve close to 160 nonprofits within the tri-state area, and I'm quite proud of that. So enough on Marks Paneth and me. This is really about you guys and helping you, at least disseminating some information that might help you. Although 2020 is a year that I just want to take my hats off to anybody helping the nonprofit world, because you guys have pulled it out without a doubt, and you need a big round of applause, that's for sure. So hoping we can provide some insights, particularly Renee, who has been in the trenches, I'm going to say, over this last year, and surely has proven the worth of Girls Inc. So the first question we wanted to touch upon is really around budgeting. As we know, the budgeting process is really around creating a plan to spend to meet your mission, right? Well, any best laid budget, as we've come to appreciate, particularly if you are a calendar year and you are a calendar year and nonprofit, probably around this time last year, you were looking to get that budget pushed and approved by your board, right? I'm not even talking about the fiscal year end nonprofits. And we can actually ask the question to you, is a budget really the reality, or kind of wishful thinking, and kind of the best practices around that? And I know Renee has a lot to say in terms of budgeting and the better practices she implemented over at Girls Inc. So I'm going to turn it over to Renee, and she'll help us decipher the better practices, right?
Yes, good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. I hope can say it. I can say it too. It's still January. We're just gonna talk a little bit about some of the changes that we had to make. I mean, most nonprofits, they pull together a budget, and a lot of time people take a look at what they were able to do one year, and they are able to make projections or assumptions over what it is that they're going to do in the next year. They'll anticipate growth. Well, COVID caused us to pivot quite a bit. And, and prior to that, we had already started to try to look at the budget from a much more strategic perspective, as opposed to just taking one set of numbers and making assumptions to add another set of numbers, but adding some narrative to that, adding some strategy to that, to say, you know what, based on these numbers, based on the contributions that come into the organization, where is there room for growth? Where is there room to do something different? Where is there room for opportunity? Where is there no room for growth, where it's pretty static? So that was one thing. And then COVID kind of caused us to do a couple of other things, looking at our budget more strategically and trying to figure out, what's the best way to move forward, how to plan. So one of the things that we did is implement some scenario planning. And I'll say that a lot of things that COVID has taught us are things that it makes sense to keep doing. So what we did is we did scenario planning. We created 2 or 3 other potential budget scenarios. So we had our regular budget with our regular assumptions. And then we thought about, what if this happens? And what if that happens? We created some worst case scenarios. And then we created budgets based on those what ifs and those worst case scenarios. And we also were able to, in advance, kind of plan around that, to say, if this is a budget that begins to present, if these are the numbers, the actuals that begin to present themselves, and we find that we're coming into a place where we have a gap, we already have plans on how we can address those issues and maybe fill those gaps. So we created our regular budget and then 3 scenarios, so that no matter what happened, we were prepared for whatever would come next. Can't hear you, Hope.
I know. I'm trying to be considerate so you don't hear all of my background noise, and then I never unmute myself. May that be the worst thing that happens now in 2021.
Right.
100% on target. If you saw, I was like shaking my head, like, of the many words in terms of COVID and this environment we've been living in, scenario planning is surely one of those, and you hit it head on. Worst case and kind of that wish list of what you want it to be. But it has taught us we have to have that. And I think, lessons learned, regardless COVID or no COVID, we should still continue on that scenario planning. And so I'm going to turn it actually over to Raj, who's really our financial consultant who helps nonprofits. So his insights are invaluable to this panel as well. So Raj.
Sure. So thanks, Hope. So I'm the founder and CEO of Foresight, as well as Charter School Business Management. And we've managed the finances for about 150 nonprofits and schools in New York City and around the country. We also professionally develop board members and leadership teams at nonprofits on the components of responsible financial management, as well as our financial best practices. And it's this whole model that we call do it for you or teach you how, or a combination of both. So as far as budgeting, we like to distinguish between a reality-based budget and what I call a bogus budget. So to me, if there are reasonable assumptions for every single line item, then it is a reality-based budget. If it's any less than that, then it leans much more towards a bogus budget, because you're just pulling out a number, or it has to be based on some sort of assumption. We also like to see a separation between the operating budget that represents the income statement and a capital budget that represents the cash required for assets, as well as paying down liabilities. And a third thing that we look for is if you're in a situation where there are more expenses than revenues, and you knowingly draw down on your unrestricted net assets, which is your accumulated surpluses from past fiscal years, then that can be a perfectly fine, healthy budget, depending on how large or small your unrestricted net assets are. It just comes down to your intent. Are you knowingly doing things, or are you reactive and just reacting to the situation, which we all had to react to COVID, obviously, but to just be in control and taking charge is really the best thing. I think, Hope, you wanted to chime in next.
Yes, and I didn't mute myself. So I'm ready. Yes, 100% in terms of kind of thinking through that budget. And you said it right. It's this accumulation of net assets and using those, we often use that word in terms of reserves, like what are those reserves? And surely in this time that we just experienced and are still experiencing, but I do believe it's the year of hope, and I'm not plugging my own name, but 2021 is the year of hope. We know we need to build those reserves. So that's another lesson we probably learned through this. In terms of from an auditor perspective and budgeting, we like to see how that budget is developed. And we'll be talking a little bit more about financial reporting and the packages that boards get, et cetera. It's important to us because you as board members, you as C-suite management working at nonprofits, et cetera, the number you actually approve at a budget could be very different from a set of financial statements at the end of the year. One of the things we do is actually look at that budget and bridge it for board members so they could see the change that has happened. That's one of the areas. The other area, and Renee probably hit on it, is this whole concept of zero-based budgeting. When you're strategically looking at your programs and really budgeting, quote unquote, from the ground up, because just placing a 2%, 3% increase on prior year balances might not really be the realisticness of the budget, if that's a word, but really reality of the budget. So zero-based budgeting gives every organization an ability to really think through strategically what it costs to run a program. And I'm not saying you do that across the board. You may choose to pick one program per year that you'll budget that way and see how it works for an organization. So I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, I guess our banker or advocate for foundation, right? I meant to ask kind of that whole role, but you'll talk a little bit about that.
And then Jennifer, before we move into the next segment, there are some questions that are popping
Terrific.
up. So after you've finished, before we move on to the next, just pass it off to me, and I'll hit some of the questions. And there's some comments too that I think would
Terrific.
be share.
Great.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Smith. As Hope said, I'm the Community Development Officer for Investors Bank, New York. I wear a couple different hats at the bank. One of which is, as a banker, I take care of our nonprofit clients, and I also advocate for not-for-profits in the New York footprint to the Investors Foundation, which is our grant-making entity. So I work with our nonprofit clients quite a bit to work on their grant applications and present the applications to the foundation in hopes of securing funding for nonprofits within our New York footprint. So I was just looking in the chat. I just want to kind of echo what my fellow panelists have said, but From a bank's perspective, we really work with the reality. So your bank statements from the previous year are going to tell your story as you're planning your budget for 2021. But with the pandemic, I would probably suggest going back to the previous year to look at those bank statements as well, to look at your cash flows, which months you were cash rich, which months you were cash poor. Take a look and see if perhaps a line of credit might be needed to cover timing differences from when you expect grants to come in and when you need to pay your payroll, for example, or if you have program expenses that come out. So all of those things as you're planning your budgeting, I would take those into play and really work with your actuals and your reality, and not just what you hope will happen in 2021. I think that's a good time for some questions.
Okay, so there were a couple of comments that I thought might be worth just mentioning. Lawrence Mitchell noted that COVID-19 impacted the organization by shifting revenue stream. There was a tremendous increase in individual donations and a reduction in revenues from Medicaid and Medicare. Hope agreed 100%.
He's my client.
Eric Toth said for 2020, they focused more on the P&L than their 2020 budget, which was made almost completely irrelevant due to COVID, which I'm sure is the case for many. For 2021, they are working to create what he'd call the most realistic worst case budget for the board's approval. There are many complicating factors that are likely to change at any time in 2021. I think we can all think of a few. Month to month flexibility around those things we can't control this year. And then finally, we have a question posed by Douglas Giles. It's felt like over the years it has been a mixture of both. We are a charter school, so we are always looking to incorporate things that we expect to make the educational experience more impactful. But as with all things involving New York City education, things are always fluctuating. And with that, I don't know if any of the panelists have anything to say or add about that. If
You know,
not,
I wasn't just saying, yeah, I think everybody was on target.
yeah, everyone was on target.
And not only you, Lawrence, because you're my client, but yeah.
So I want to keep things moving. We want to make sure
Thank you.
Q&A at the end, and we're already at 8:51, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to move into Q2.
So going back to the concept of your bank statements and your financial statements really tell the story of your organization. Our next question is what do your financial reports consist of, and what frequency do you provide them to management, the finance committee of the board, and full board of directors? And I'll just comment first on that. So from a banking perspective, we would be looking for if you're, for example, applying for a loan, we'd be looking for your tax returns, at least 2 years of tax returns, and your bank statements, at least 3 months. From the grant perspective, we'd be looking for your ideally audited financial statements. And if you don't have audited financial statements, we'd be looking for interim statements that have ideally been at least reviewed by an auditor. And to go more into depth with that, I'd like to turn it over to Raj to talk further on this question.
Sure. So as far as reports, the frequency, we always recommend sending and reviewing reports on a monthly basis to minimize surprises. We're not totally opposed to quarterly, but if the numbers are tight, monthly is certainly better. And then we recommend with the reports, we're big fans of once you've solidified your budget, you want to report against that budget, and many nonprofits will just do budget versus actuals, but that's only a look backwards at what happened yesterday. So it's a combination of what happened yesterday and what you believe is going to happen tomorrow. So the 5 components that we recommend in your financial reports, and of course, everybody's got a different take on this, so this is just our perspective. There's a summary page with key ratios, analyses that are for things that are most applicable to your type of nonprofit. And that indicate whether you're within the healthy range or outside of the healthy range, as well as a budget narrative to explain the state of the finances. Then we like to see a balance sheet to see where your assets and liabilities are, and then not only budget versus actuals from the beginning of the fiscal year to the end of the period you're reporting, but also forecasts through the end of the fiscal year on an accrual basis. And if cash is low, then forecasts should also be done on a cash basis so you can predict way in advance whether there's going to be any months in the future that appear to be dangerously close to zero or running negative, so that you can accelerate accounts receivable and slow down accounts payable. And then a final thing that we like to see in the reporting is an income statement, profit and loss per restricted funding source, so that that indicates how much time and money is left to spend to satisfy different grant requirements. It's hard enough to get the dollars. You don't want to leave anything on the table. So the only way to do that is to know where you stand, know how much is left. And sometimes you're deceived that, oh, we're sitting on a lot of money, but if a lot of that money is already spoken for, then your net amount that's available may be quite less, than you thought. So I think again, you chime in, it'd be good to share your perspective.
Sure, and I appreciate it. Again, the auditor is important too, but I just want to say ditto to everything Raj just said. I mean, that's kind of what we look for in terms of what that financial reporting package is. And I think Raj alluded to, narratives. I refer to them as MD&A, management's discussion and analysis. In the for-profit world, it's a requirement. It's also a requirement in the government world, but as much explanation you can give about what's going on in the financial, quote unquote, house of your organization, it's important to be able to explain it. What we are seeing more and more, though, is what I'll call financial dashboards. We all love pictures, and I'm a firm believer pictures say, as an example, a lot more than a narrative. And some of these financial dashboards were probably price prohibitive years ago. Now, very easy to use in terms of software and what those graphs look like. So I do think that's another thing important. Raj picked up on the profit and loss per program, particularly in these times. Think about a set of financial statements for a nonprofit. It's a group of revenues, and you have your expenses by program and supporting services, and it's on the statement of functional expenses that you actually get to see what you're spending per program, right? But there's no revenue stream that gets associated with that. So being able to pick out the revenues associated with program, and particularly in a world where you might not have as much discretionary dollars to spend on programs that need more of the contributory based support, if you're not getting true fee for service for those programs, you got to really take a step back. One other better practice, and I just suggest this, we do this for our clients, it's called white papers. You as members of boards, management, on a set of financial statements, you see one line for contributions, you see one line for accounts receivable. What we prepare, we call them white papers, is every line item that makes up that account. And we talked as a group. I said one of the more, the one that takes probably more discussion, and I've seen it happen, when we break out professional expenses, which is a line item on your statement of activities, it's kind of interesting the discussions that happen at the committee levels and the board level. Oh, I didn't know we worked with that person, or et cetera. So these white papers are also a good piece of information to include in the financial reporting package to your board. I'm going to ask Renee to give some insights on financial reporting and what they do over at Girls Inc.
Absolutely. So we do review our financial reports every single month, and especially during COVID, we look at them really closely. We have a finance committee, of course, that's on our board of directors, and we review that information with our finance committee first, and then it's presented to the larger board. And what's really important also is being able to have, everybody's not a numbers person, and everyone is not comfortable with numbers. So we have a wonderful committee who's able to kind of break down the numbers in layman's terms and break down the information in the statement so that the entire board feels confident and what they understand about our finances, and they have a clear picture of where we are with regards to our finances. So that includes some narratives that may explain scenarios or situations, or just information that provides a bird's eye view of this is where we stand, this is what our cash run out is, and information like that. So, and what's even more important is taking a look at those financial records in the midst of COVID and comparing it to which scenario that we created is it best fitting, right? Is this falling into a worst case? Is this falling into our wish list? Is it falling somewhere between? Are there any gaps that we're able to start identifying in any particular area? Do we have to begin to take any type of action to fill those gaps? So we're looking at all of that now in the midst of COVID.
Terrific.
Yeah. I'll jump into the next question in the interest of time. So the third question is, what percentage of your total revenues come from each revenue source, and how guaranteed is each one? So Hope, let's have you start this time.
I appreciate it. So yes, from an audit perspective, we're always looking as quote unquote a going concern. Part of that is revenue dependency. And I define revenue dependency, on different types of revenue. Yes, contributions. We could look at, the different facets of contributions, whether it's government support, donor support, and donors could be, corporations, foundations, individuals. So that in of itself should be looked at in terms of diversifying revenue. But if you're an organization, as many contributory organizations are, that's their revenue stream with maybe some investment income, unlike possibly a performing arts organization where, you have ticket sales. And if you're doing performances, you may have a shop or a museum like has, a store. So those are also types of revenue and the different streams to reduce truly any sort of dependency. And so we serve clients that have this, but we look for this array of revenues. And it's important, particularly if you are contributory based, dependent on contributions. And I say, no different than zero-based budgeting. You're starting from zero every year. And how do you, fill that budget gap in so many ways? And through this revenue diversification is a way to do that. And I know, Renee, you monitor this quite closely at Girls Inc. So a little bit of insight from you would be very helpful.
So sure, what we do is we take a look at our contributions and when it's time to budget and also throughout the year, all of our contributions, whether it's government or corporations, fee for service, foundations, and we kind of analyze where is there room for growth and where is there not room for growth. So when it comes to like government, there's not a lot of room for growth, and that could be one of the more volatile, right, types of contribution, because if an administration changes, we've experienced where the new administration may not be as interested in supporting youth services. So, we may lose money on that end. So, that's a very conservative area as far as growth potential is concerned. Corporations is an area of contributions where we find that we have a lot more opportunity as we, move through the year and develop relationships, and, the likelihood of more corporations coming to us and being able to provide funding is much more likely than in some categories. So we take a look at what those different contribution categories are, and we analyze what is the potential in this for growth in these particular areas or not in those particular areas. And then we make assumptions based on that. And then we set goals based on that. If we want to reach out and maybe we want to increase our, corporate funding because we know that government funding is probably going to go down because there's going to be an administration change. Or, we look at that as a potential way to fill a gap or to plan for growth. So, when it comes to what we're the way our kind of pie of funding kind of goes, like we know right now that corporations is probably close to 40% of our contributions that come into the organization. It also gives us an opportunity to look and say, well, individual giving may not be as high as corporations, and based on, our targets and our budgets and how we would like for our pie to look, right? Maybe this year is a year that we focus on strategies to increase individual giving. so that we can really be strategic in managing the budget, and understand, where our strengths are in the budget, and speak to and operate to those strengths and prepare for any weaknesses.
That's great. Terrific. And makes perfect sense. To just keep your eye on the ball, or should I say eye on the revenue, throughout the year, right? So I guess, Jennifer, any thoughts that you want to add to this?
Just a quick comment, just listening to what Renee was saying, that focus on diversifying and looking at sort of like as a pie, I think is a great strategy. When we're looking at organizations, like reviewing loan applications, seeing a large dependency on government grants is challenging, because, as Renee said, grants can end, and then the organization would not necessarily be able to pay back their loan. From a grants perspective, the foundation is interested in funding strong programs that, with the funding, if the funding were to end, that the organization would be able to continue and to seek new funding sources. So just re-emphasizing, looking at events fundraising, government funding, individual giving, corporate funding, and trying to strengthen each of those so that you're not completely dependent on any one part of the pie. And I think Raj would have some additional thoughts in this area.
Yeah, a lot has been said on this, and I'll be brief. I really just think of this as a seesaw, right? So if there's certain revenues that you're expecting that don't come through, then you have to have the associated expenses that you may be removing from the equation, unless it's balanced by another revenue source. And then on the flip side, this does happen in certain situations where a nonprofit will get flooded with new revenues that they did not expect. So it's also good to have a plan for how would you spend if all of a sudden you're going viral and everybody's pouring money into your nonprofit. So it's having a plan on both sides of the equation. And I think in the interest of time, let's move on to question 4.
Thank you.
Great. So moving on from revenues, we want to talk a little bit about protecting your organization and putting policies and procedures in place to protect against fraud. So the fourth question is your financial policies and procedures manual designed to reduce the frequency and magnitude of fraud? And Hope, if you would like to comment first.
The auditor's dream, right? Fraud, find the fraud. That's the expectation. Manuals are great, I always say, but they could just sit on a shelf. So it's really dusting them off every once in a while and making sure you do have something about that to protect the organization. That goes without saying. Just some helpful hints, and I know we're shortening our discussions just for the time allotment left, but things to think about, particularly we do from an auditor perspective. We talk about headline risk at nonprofits. That's probably the most important thing. Some of you have heard me say this before. A corporation could do really bad. They get rid of the board, they get rid of C-suite, and then all is forgiven. They bring in a new team. Nonprofits never get forgiven. That's everlasting if there's ever a fraud. It's always in somebody's back of your mind. You're using stakeholder dollars. You got to be careful. So what are some of the better practices? You all have conflict of interest policies. I'm sure we look for them from an audit. On an audit, we share with our clients who signs them what they write as a conflict. But one of the better practices there, as I talked about the professional fees white paper, you should also attach to your conflict of interest your top 25 vendors. I'm glass half full person. Every board member signs them to the best of their ability. They're not looking to hide something from you. The idea is they might not necessarily know who you do business with in detail. So by providing them, and I say 25 top 25 vendors, you may have so many vendors, maybe 50 is the right number, who knows, maybe 7 is the right number, but provide that with your conflict of interest statements that you're asking your board members to sign on an annual basis. That's a great better practice. And I have a couple of others around data analytics. We use them as part of the audit process. Again, there's a lot of things you could do as management, The tools are just getting that much more quote unquote sophisticated yet easy to use to be able to see trends within your financial information and anomalies. That's what we look for at an audit level. And I always talk about a whistleblower policy. You know, we got it, it's part of the manual, but you should start off a board meeting. Were there any whistleblowers? What's going on? Everybody should be made aware. Those are just some of the better practices around for, and of course, having a sound set of internal controls. That goes without saying. So I'm gonna, I know Raj, you work very closely. You're in the trenches. You're one putting those policies together. So.
Yeah, so we, I'll name a few practices. One, we absolutely want to make sure that there's a different person from who's processing payments, who is doing the bank reconciliation process, whether that's an in-house person or an outsourced person to do the bank reconciliations. And for non-financial people, that means through your accounting system, you are showing, you can confirm for every single debit and every single credit that this, whatever happened in reality happened in your bank statement and vice versa. And there've been lots of times that people caught transactions that didn't occur, that showed up, and fraud happened on their bank account, and or one person was doing both sides of it, and they had a gambling problem, and then they stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's been all sorts of crazy things we've seen. Another practice is that we recommend the finance committee of the board to review your manual annually with your management team and see what's changed. You may have added a person or two to your finance team, and there's even more segregation of duties, or you may have been outsourcing or vice versa. So any kind of changes have to be reflected in those policies. And then if your nonprofit really wants to be an overachiever, you can do one of two things, or even both. You can ask a forensic accountant or your auditor who conducts the annual financial audit every couple of years, because of how much fraud and cyber attacks have been happening over time, to take a look beyond the look that the finance committee of the board did. And then if you manage your finances in-house, you can have one of your in-house finance staff become a certified fraud examiner. And that's a completely separate thing. They teach you in that course how to detect fraud and what to do about it. So Jennifer, what would you like to chime in with?
I would just recommend reviewing with your bank the things that they have to help you protect against fraud. If you're not using it already with the online banking, you can set permissions for the online banking for administrators so that you can have reviews before payments go out. With checks, you can set it up with positive pay so that you can review checks that are being paid before they go to make sure that everything is correct. So just use your banker as a resource to set up additional fraud protections if you don't have them in place already, and make sure that you put those procedures into your manual for annual review.
Terrific. All good practices. And Renee, I know you just want to say you don't have any fraud, right?
Absolutely not.
Well, in some cases, silence is golden. I don't know in this case, but
And we use all of those. We have our internal controls, we have whistleblower policies, confidentiality statements, code of conduct, and all of that. And we do review them on an annual basis. And if we get a new, if our treasurer changes, let's say, we definitely look through those with them. People may have different perspectives, and, if it's an opportunity to update it even more, we'll have our new treasurer take a look, and if there's something that means a lot to them, they say this should be part of it. And then we try to separate duties as much as possible so that, the same person is not doing too many things in a row, right? So it's like, if this person is taking in the funds, this person is recording the funds, so.
Right. Perfect. That's the sound internal control system we want to hear about from the audit perspective. So we have one more question. I think we have time, right, Heidi? Give a thumbs up. And this is really around board financial smarts, I'll call it. And I know Renee has a lot to talk about in terms of board skills through her own managing of the board and the diversity there. But just curious, your thoughts on boards of nonprofits needing professional development on what what I'll call responsible financial management looks like. And I just want to caveat by saying not everybody has, the degree in finance, right? So the idea is it's okay not to know, but you need to ask questions. And so that's part of this, what I would consider professional development that's so important. And I know, you've spoken about it, Renee, to us in terms of what Girls Inc. does and how you oversee that. So
absolutely. So when it comes to finances, for people who are in finances, it's easy, and there's terminology and language and lingo. And for those who don't come from finance, it can be intimidating. Numbers can be intimidating. So we work with our finance committee and the board to communicate in a way that makes them comfortable, makes them feel like they don't have to go and get a degree or MBA in finance, but that they can understand, right, the financial status of the organization. They know what's going on, they get it. But I think that, and we've tried to do this as much as possible, that consistent professional development is really essential, because if this is not your day-to-day and you're not steeped into this language, it's sometimes intimidating when you're looking at income statements and versus profit and loss, like all of these concepts and all of these different types of forms and the way that things look, it can really be intimidating. And it's important to know and understand the financial status and health and wealth of the organization. So it's really essential that we continue in that process. I mean, just with anything else in your own career, right? Continuous professional development is important for continued growth. So that understanding and having a good financial team to rely on as far as your finance committee to be able to explain things in like layman terms. I've said, and not to the insult of the financial people, but can you say that in English? Because even executive directors, we're not always, our job is not finance. Our job is to run the organization. We come from different areas, from programming, from development. So we're not all always, very well versed on finances. I'm not very well versed on finances, but I have an amazing team between our bookkeepers, our auditors, our accounting firms, our finance committee, who are able to support me and help me understand and educate me, so I know what to look for. I know what these terms mean and what and I can now contribute to being strategic about our budget and looking at things a certain way. So that is a continuous process, and it makes sense. And take advantage. I know my accountants and auditors, they've all offered opportunities to come in and talk to your board. I can talk to your board for 15 minutes. I can come and do a presentation. I can let them know about things. So take advantage of that type of stuff.
Terrific. Yeah, without saying it's quote unquote making the financial information as easy as ABC, right? So I'm going to turn it, Raj. You want to just have say a few things on board development on financial skills?
Sure. Yeah. So we're really big on getting clear on the 10 components of responsible financial management, and there's a lot of whenever you say there's 10 things, it's like, oh my God. So I'm going to just type it into the chat, but really quick. The first is the roles, responsibilities, policies, and procedures. Who's doing what and why and how. 2 is all of the accounting. 3 is the payroll. 4 is audit. 5 is the budgeting. 6 is the financial reporting and forecasting. 7 is cash management. 8th is growth and knowing whether to grow and when to grow and when to actually put pause on growth, because it's just like we've got too much dysfunctional stuff going on, and to grow and on a faulty foundation. Or not. And then 9 is risk management and risk mitigation. And then 10 is effective execution, which involves people and technology. So, quite honestly, this is the foundation of a forthcoming book that I'm writing about, and I'm very excited that this is one of the good things that'll result from COVID. So I'm working on it and trying to get it out to the marketplace. So
that's great. We look forward to the signed copies, Raj. Any last words from our banker? Thoughts?
I think for me, the cash management is the part that really sticks out, because that's where the bank would be in charge. So I think, again, just make sure you have a good relationship with your banker. And if you need cash management, I'm not sure if that's exactly what Raj means by cash management, but for me, cash management is how you manage your cash at the bank, and any like lockbox services and check processing and things like that. So I think that's it. Just you, yep.
So I think we were, there is time. Are there questions, Heidi, throughout?
There hasn't been any specific questions. There are comments.
Okay.
Just to reiterate, there is going to be a link to this video that we're going to post on our website. I'm going to put our website there in a second. There were some comments, but I just wanted to first, before we move into a Q&A where we can open it up to just general questions, if you have other questions maybe that we didn't even touch on, we do have about 10 minutes left. But first, I wanted to thank all the panelists for sharing all of their experience and expertise, especially to our special guest Renee Flagler for carving out some time on an early Wednesday morning to share all the wonderful things she's been doing over at Girls Inc. and sharing her perspectives and expertise. And thank you to all of you nonprofit leaders for joining us today and getting up and listening and sharing your comments. Please don't forget to mark your calendars for our nonprofit leadership exchange. It's going to happen on April 20th. It's going to be a different experience. It's not going to be the same experience you've had before. We're going to have really interactive and engaging breakout sessions and topics to discuss amongst your peers. So we'll be sending an invite out on that. If you have any topics that you want us to focus on a future masterclass, please let us know. Put comments in the sidebar, or just contact us directly and let us know, because this is all for you. This is Mission Control is a nonprofit think tank that is bringing you what you want. So if there are things that you want, let us know, because that's what we're here for. That's our mission. We're all very deeply rooted in the nonprofit space. We care about the nonprofit space deeply. We're all connected to nonprofits. We serve on boards. We run nonprofits ourselves on the side. So, please let us know what you want to talk about. We're going to have a Q&A session right now. We have a few minutes left. We also have a few closing remarks from our panelists. They're going to talk about, sort of the one big thing. If you were going to pick one thing that you want to, leave all of our audience with today, what would that be? And then we'll close out our masterclass for the day. So if there are any questions, please post them in the side. While we're waiting for those questions to populate, I'm just going to turn that big last question over to the panelists so they can chit chat and talk. We have one question. Hold on. What are some recommendations you would have with cash management of restricted and unrestricted funding sources? So I'll turn that over to Raj. You can jump in.
I'll jump in. So one is the first thing is to get clear on what triggers those dollars to come in, because very often with nonprofits, there's strings attached. You must submit this report. You have to log into some portal. There's something that's going to get that payment to come in. The second thing is, which one of three ways is that money going to be coming in? Is it 100% going to be advanced to your nonprofit, saying, okay, we applied to so-and-so foundation, we applied for $50,000, and it's like, yep, you got it, and here's the check along with it? Or are they going to say, you know what, spend other money first, and then we'll reimburse you 100% after you spent it and you've proven that you've spent it? And then a third way is, we'll give you part of it. Here's 20% up front. Here's 10 grand. Prove that you spent it. Then we'll give you a little bit more. And then once you fully spent it, then submit a final report, and then we'll give you the rest. So it's somewhere along that spectrum of fully in advance, fully reimbursed, a little bit along the way, and just make sure you're jumping through all the hoops that you need to get the cash into your bank account.
Does anybody else have anything they want to add on the panelists? We have another question that popped up, but if there's somebody else that wants to add something to the first question, feel free.
No, I think Raj covered that nicely.
Okay, so we have a question from Matthew Bloom. How can I resolve conflicts between what the head of school wants to do and the budget that the finance committee approves after making its own adjustments?
So sorry, I would jump right in. There's, you have to get everybody aligned. I would have, the process that we like to follow is reports are first sent to management. Management has to sign off. Once management signs off, then it goes to the finance committee. Finance committee signs off or makes adjustments. Now, if there's some adjustments that the finance committee makes that are in conflict with what the head of school or head of the nonprofit has, then you have to get everybody in a room and say, hey, listen, let's talk this out. Because if that misalignment goes to the full board, then it doesn't inspire confidence. It becomes very challenging. So you have to get everybody in the room to align on what this looks like. Otherwise, it's gonna become a challenge that may only get bigger over time.
Thanks, Raj.
Yeah, that was perfect. That's exactly. The lack of confidence is the key there. If something changed, you hit it. Yep.
So I'm just, if there's another question that pops up, I'll jump right in. But in the last few minutes that we have, just to be respectful of everyone's time and end on time, if the panelists, we could just go around to all the panelists and just the one big thing that you want as a takeaway for everyone on our masterclass today, what would it be?
So should we start ABC?
Why don't you go first?
Right, auditor. That's what I was thinking. No, that was selfish. I didn't mean it that way at all. One thing it didn't really come out in our discussion, but it really is tone at the top. And I am a firm believer, no different than I say in my own personal family. It's really how you treat others. And that comes from the tone at the top. This is such an uncertain time. And I know I said, and I believe it, this is the year of hope. We see an end to this, but you have to be very sensitive to who you're working with and who's working for you. And that tone, and I know many of you that are on this call, this webinar, you have that tone, and I applaud you. But I just wanted to overemphasize, as I oversee a group and things we've never dealt with before. There were doctor's appointments, there were kids, getting sick. There's a lot more happening internally than ever before. So I know you do it. You're in this industry because you have hearts. I just wanted to just add that in terms of, aside from all this financial information, it really is. And the tone at the top works, about policies, procedures, et cetera. But I just wanted to add that layer in there. So I'm going to turn it over to our banker, Jennifer B.
I'm going to say that your financial statements tell your organization's story. So when you are thinking about marketing your organization, remember that your financial statements are public information and that funders are going to be looking at them as an essential part of the potential funding process.
So from the consultant's perspective, I see so many nonprofits saying that the auditor gave us a clean bill of health in our audited financial statements. Everything's lovely, and yes, you need that, but you have to take it the next step and look at the fiscal health of the numbers and whether they are in the ranges of all these different key ratios. So the example I always use is if your doctor, your primary care physician went to you and said, hey, your blood pressure is 300 over 200. This is an accurate reading. You'd be like, well, thank you, but the healthy range is 120 over 80, and that's we're not looking solely for accuracy. We're looking also for interpretation. So you must take the time to interpret, and the auditor's role is to make sure that there is no, ideally no fraud, and are these numbers believable numbers, and yes, to a degree, yes, with a lot of qualification, but you have to interpret the health of those numbers, and just do not forget the importance of that interpretation. That's more important than clean bill of health, which is important, but it's more important to see what story, just like Jennifer said, are the numbers truly telling you.
And last but not least, our special guest.
All right.
It's probably her wall says it all, right?
Yeah, her wall is on fire. I love it.
It is one of my favorite quotes. So I would say, with regards to being on the nonprofit side, and doing this hard, it's not hard work, it's hard work. So doing this hard work and everything being about the mission, is that be invested in the health and wealth of your organization for the sake of the mission. And when it comes to budgeting, be strategic, because there's so much opportunity in the strategies. That's it.
Terrific.
Okay,
These are all wonderful.
I think I tried to jot down the topics that everyone wanted to leave the audience with. Wow, I couldn't have timed it better. I want to say I did it all myself, but I didn't. It's 9:30 and we ended on the second, because you know what? That's how you do it. You've got accountants and bankers and consultants, and we get it right, and we meet the deadline and the budget. So, and I'll leave you all with a huge thank you. And Mission Control is here for you. If you need anything, reach out to us. We will get it in the hands of whoever can answer the question. And let us know what you want to hear in the future. We love doing this. This is what we get up in the morning for.
We have a website, right?
And we have a website, and I'm going to put that up too. Thank you, Hope. So our website is www.missioncontrolny.com. And I'm going to put that in our little message board over here. And visit that. You'll see our past masterclasses there too. And then we're going to post the future masterclasses and all kinds of interesting information. So stay connected. Come and dig in with us on our next leadership exchange. And a huge thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Stay safe.